All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the 14th annual FCRN Legislative Breakfast. Our theme this year is Bringing Democracy Home. I'm Michelle Jeffroy, and I'm the Agency Engagement and Advocacy Coordinator at the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts. I'm also on the FCRN Public Policy Task Force and the Planning Committee for this event. I'd like to start by taking a moment to recognize the legislators who are in the room with us today. Congressman Jim McGovern, State Representative Steve Kulik, State Representative Paul Mark, State Representative Susanna Whips, and State Representative Paul Broder, who's joining us all the way from Melrose this morning. There are a few other people I'd like to recognize this morning as well. Joe Comerford, who is running for State Senator for the Hampshire, Franklin, and Worcester District. Natalie Blais, who is running for State Representative for the 1st Franklin District. And John Gould, who's with us this morning on behalf of State Senator Adam Hines, who was not able to join us today. Thank you all for coming. I'd also like to thank GCTV for filming this event, and our gracious hosts here at Greenfield Community College, who allow us to use this beautiful space year after year. Many of you know that GCC has a new president. For those of you who don't know her, Dr. Eve Solomon Fernandez succeeds Bob Pura as the 10th president of GCC. While she was most recently the president of Cumberland County College in rural New Jersey, Eve has lived most of her life in Massachusetts. She has worked as an adjunct faculty member, researcher, and administrator in varied institutions, including UMass, Boston College, and Mass Bay Community College, among others. Eve is passionate about rural Western Massachusetts and about the Pioneer Valley and appreciates all of our assets, including our breathtaking natural vistas and, of course, GCC. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Solomon Fernandez for a welcome from the college.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning. Oh my God, we can do better than that. We just won, the Red Sox just won last night. We're going to the World Series. How about that? Gosh, nothing says better, welcome home better than those wins over the last week. And I just lost it on Twitter. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, I know you've experienced that. I love the Red Sox and I love baseball. Welcome to Greenfield Community College, your community college. It is so nice to be here in the Pioneer Valley and here in Franklin County specifically, and I am just delighted to call Greenfield home. A couple of years ago, I described Massachusetts as a bubble, and this is the bubble within the bubble, and I have to say, I missed it. I missed it. This morning's topic is one that is of utmost interest to me, both personally and professionally. Growing up under dictatorships and authoritarian regimes in Haiti gave me a deep appreciation for democracy. I will share a personal anecdote with you. A few years ago, I began to persuade my husband, who hadn't voted for years, not because he's apathetic, he just didn't find his place. I began to persuade him to register to vote. I was adamant that he participated in those historic elections, and he did. Within my lifetime, sooner rather than later, I hope to experience at least one other historic election, regardless of which party she may be from. I hope that by the time my kids are able to vote, that we will no longer view those as historic elections. As a college president, part of my role is to foster an environment where all views and perspectives are welcomed. It is to foster an environment where we can understand how we come to espouse the views that we hold and to keep an open mind about difference. As educators, we have the responsibility to encourage our students to learn and practice the art and virtue of engaging in civil discourse. Our diverse paths and lived experience influence the values we embrace. Education helps us to examine critically those experiences and make educated decisions. With the growing number of unenrolled Americans, we know that our population overall is choosing not based on party, but on the candidate's position. Greenfield Community College has a long history of serving as a convener of the community, as a college that is intellectually vibrant and as an engaged community of scholars, practitioners, students, and teachers. We hope to continue the work of advancing democracy and civil discourse within and outside of this institution. Thank you for allowing us to host this morning's event, and thank you for your support of this college and the important work that it plays in the broader community. Have a great conference.
Thank you, Dr. Solomon Fernandez. Our first speaker is someone I'm sure most of you know, as he gets around Franklin County quite a bit for somebody who lives in Worcester and spends a considerable amount of his time in Washington, D.C. Congressman Jim McGovern has served in the U.S. House of Representatives since 1996, and during his time in Congress has been an unfailing advocate for the most vulnerable in our society, the very same people that FCRN supports and serves in Franklin County. He is one of the most present politicians that I know, making a remarkable effort to be engaged in his district and listen to his constituents. It is my pleasure to welcome Congressman Jim McGovern to the stage.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much. And thank you, President Solomon Hernandez, a president I agree with. So it's great to be with you. I don't get to say that very often. And let me thank everybody here this morning for being so, you all look great. You look good this morning. I was up early driving from Worcester. I didn't know whether I'd be awake when I got here, but you guys are all awake, and you give me great hope, and I appreciate all the incredible work that you do. It is so vital. I'm here to talk about something that I don't really need to convince you about, and that is, what's at stake in these elections for Franklin County, for Massachusetts, and for the country. Let me just say it very simply: everything. is at stake. In 18 days, 6 hours, and 56 minutes from now, it'll be Election Day. And this is the most consequential election of our lifetime. And I really believe that. And what is at stake are a lot of the programs and a lot of the initiatives that you all work very hard on that actually help the most vulnerable in our communities. For whatever reason, in Washington, D.C., it has become unfashionable to worry about the vulnerable or the poor and to believe that they, too, deserve an opportunity. People who are struggling in this country have been scapegoated, have been demonized, have been diminished in Washington. And quite frankly, it is disgusting. And I think a lot of this is happening because of the leadership at the very top office in this country. Now, there are a lot of issues at stake, and I'm going to talk about a few of them. But I'm going to tell you there'll be one thing on the ballot that I think needs to be front and center, and that is decency. In all my life, and I would say in all of our combined lifetimes, I don't think we've ever had a president who has behaved quite like this president. I don't think we've ever had a president who thought it was okay to demean women, to bully political opponents, to say, I want to lock up my political opponents. I don't think I've ever, in my life, ever thought we would have a president that would give comfort to the most intolerant voices in our country, white supremacists, neo-Nazis. And we've seen that. It's there. And I don't think I've ever seen a president who has gone so low. Every time I think he can't go lower, he goes lower. He's like a bottomless pit, right? And, I remember when John McCain died. I disagree with John McCain on a lot of issues. We worked together on some issues. But despite our disagreements, I always thought he was an honorable man, dedicated to public service. And when he died, Democrats and Republicans and independents all came together and we all mourned, except the man in the White House, who didn't want to lower the flag to half-mast. The American Legion had to shame him into doing that. Now, I have a son who's 20 and a daughter who's 17 going on 30. I try to be an example to them. I think we all try to be example to our kids and to our nephews and nieces and young people all throughout this community. And everything that I have taught my kids, everything that I have stressed to them that is important, that everybody is important, that everybody matters, that nobody is invisible, it's like it's being blown up in Washington right now. And so people have to make this decision about who we are as a country and what we want to stand for, and whether we're going to move forward united and with mutual respect, or whether we're going to continue to be polarized. I'm horrified by what's going on. I can't believe it. And while we're all dealing with all this, the Twitter rants and all the other stuff going on, I get worried that we're not focusing on what is really at stake in this election in terms of like issues that impact every single person in this room and every single person in our country. Healthcare is on top of the list about what's at stake in this election. Let me just tell you, it's not me exaggerating, it's just a fact. The Republicans have tried dozens and dozens and dozens of times to repeal the Affordable Care Act outright and replace it with nothing. So what does that mean? It means if you have a pre-existing condition right now and you have health care, if they get their way, if this election turns out in a way I don't want it to turn out, if that happens, then people with pre-existing conditions will lose their health care. That's not me being political or me being partisan. It's just what's been going on. And anybody who's paying attention would see that. And they're not only trying to do it legislatively, they have a case before the courts trying to repeal essential benefits protections for people when it comes to health care. So what's at stake is if you have a pre-existing condition and you have health care right now, you may not have health care, a year from now. Prescription drug costs. I mean, everybody's, battling with the rising cost of prescription drugs. You know, there are ways that we can fix some of this stuff. I mean, we can give Medicare the ability to negotiate on behalf of all Medicare beneficiaries to lower those prescription drug costs. We can put some checks and balances in place so that the pharmaceutical companies can't charge whatever the hell they want to charge. There are some things we can do. But if we don't have the votes to do that, what you're going to be stuck with is the status quo. You're going to see these healthcare costs continue to rise and rise and rise. And the reason why that's happening, follow the money. Follow where all the money is coming from. You know, I've had people in this community, young people in this community, I've been invited to school after school, people come down to Washington to demonstrate about the gun violence epidemic. You know, and one of the things that these young people were frustrated about was that we don't even debate or vote on any of these bills that they wanted to see enacted. For example, universal background checks, or a ban on bump stocks, or, you know, if you're too dangerous to fly because you're on an FBI terrorist watch list, you know, you shouldn't be able to buy a gun, you know, or even a ban on assault weapons. Whatever people agree or disagree on those issues, the bottom line is we are living in a country where people are being killed every hour, and even less than every hour as a result of gun violence. We're living in a country where there are massacres, and thankfully these young people in our community are saying, I don't want my future to be like that. You know, I don't want to have to worry about walking into a movie theater, or worry about going to a concert or to a nightclub or even to church, you know, and be fearful that someone may come in and shoot and kill me. So they're all coming together and saying, you got to do something. But I'll tell you this, if things don't change, not only are we going to not enact any sensible gun safety legislation, we're not even going to talk about it. Why? Follow the money. Follow the money. Driving here from Worcester, you know, it's a beautiful, beautiful drive, but I got to tell you, I need to get better cushions in my car because the roads aren't that great. In Massachusetts, we have bridges than most of the other states in this country. We need an infrastructure bill, right? I mean, we need to rebuild our country. We need to put people back to work. Quite frankly, I thought that was one area where Donald Trump and I could agree. But the bill he proposed was a press release saying, yeah, no, we want you to build infrastructure, but hey, states and cities and towns, you all pay for it. We'll just cheer you on. Well, that doesn't help. Inequality. I go into coffee shops like my colleagues in government do all the time and talk to people. You got people working 2, 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Yeah, there's a lot of jobs out there, but they don't pay anything. You know, that's not the kind of economy we want. And so we should not have passed the tax cut where 83% of the benefits go to the top 1%. If you wanted to do a tax cut, it should have been reverse, right? And these are choices we have to make. And people say, how are you going to pay for some of the things you want to do? Well, they lowered the corporate tax rate from like 37% down to like 21%. Well, maybe if you lowered it to 25%, or even 24%, you could have taken that other money that you would save and put it toward dealing with our infrastructure. Or you could have put $1 trillion of that toward dealing with the opiate crisis. Because the one thing I know is that on a local level, there are lots of very successful strategies in place that are making a difference. You need the federal government to help provide you the funding so you can expand those programs. You don't need us to tell you what to do. You're doing it already. I care very deeply about food insecurity and hunger in this community. And in a few weeks from now, we will do our annual Monty's March, where we'll march from Springfield to Greenfield, 43 miles in the freezing cold. I told Monty, we got to end hunger. I'm too old to walk 43 miles. But I do it because I care deeply about these people who don't know where their next meal is going to come from. And I know a lot of people here feel the same way. We have 43 million people in this country who are hungry. We're the richest country in the history of the world. How can that be, right? It shouldn't be. We can fix this. And instead, we're right now dealing with a farm bill, at least a House-passed version of a farm bill, that would gut the SNAP program, that would throw millions of people off the benefit, including, many people right here in Massachusetts. And not only throw them off the benefit, then their kids lose access to free breakfast and lunch at school. Like, who thinks like that? Who thinks that that's a good idea? And yet that's what's working its way through Congress right now. If things don't change in this election, I'm going to tell you, for people who are hungry in our community, it's going to get worse. People in Massachusetts are going to lose their benefits. And you're not going to be able to make it up. The charities and the churches and the synagogues, you can't make up the difference. So, that's at stake. Oh, and by the way, because I was at an event last night when somebody said to me, well, all these people need to do is work, and I said, well, the majority who can work do work, but they earn so little. Taxpayers of this country are subsidizing some pretty big companies and businesses that intentionally pay their employees less. That's just not right. And by the way, in case anyone ever asks you about the generous SNAP benefit, it's only about $1.40 per person per meal. So what we should be doing is expanding that benefit and making sure that people can have more resources to be able to buy not just food, but nutritional food. But that's at stake as well. Our foreign policy. Look what's happening right now in Saudi Arabia. An American resident goes into a Saudi consulate in Turkey and never comes out again. And we're told that he was tortured, dismembered, and his body has disappeared. And what we're hearing from our leadership in the White House is, well, we can't really do much because we want them to buy our weapons and our arms. That is not only amoral, it is immoral. That can't be who we are. And so I go on and on and on forever. You all know this stuff, right? But I just point this out because when people say, does it matter? Is it important? Yes, it is. It does matter. It is important. This is the most consequential election of our lifetime. And if the president and his party win the majority again, that is a signal that that's who we are. We always say this is not who we are. Well, if people vote that way, that's who we are. And that's the way the world is going to view us. And that is not what I think of when I think of the United States of America. That's not what I want this country to be. We're not perfect, but the bottom line is we're not as bad as they want to drag us down to be. President Trump likes to say, make America great again. I've always believed that America was a great country. I'm grateful my kids were born in this country. I thank our veterans for defending our freedom and our liberty all the time. What we need to do is make America good again. We're losing our goodness. We're losing our humanity. We're losing, our sense of community where we care about one another. And it's not just me being a bleeding heart liberal saying we ought to care about one another. That's the way we should be. That's the way it needs to be. So I just, close by saying I had a conversation with my wife the other day because she every morning she calls me and she vents about all that she's seen on the news and all she's seen on social media. And I said, you don't need to convince me. I'm with you, right? She says, I feel I need to do so. I said, you know what you do? Go out and be part of a phone bank. Call and help get somebody elected with similar views. Talk to your friends who live out of state, and get them engaged and tell them what's going on. I love talking to you, but I'm there, right? You got me. And I think all of you have constituencies here locally that also have connections outside the state. And by the way, we're Massachusetts, and everybody's saying, oh, don't worry, be happy, this election is all in the bag. Don't believe it for a minute. Don't be surprised if a week from now, all of a sudden, an independent expenditure campaign comes in here to try to disrupt the election. We can't be asleep at the wheel here. We need to make sure that we are turning out in record numbers here in Massachusetts, and we are making a statement that we care about what's happening in this country. We want things to change. So in addition to agonizing, we all got to organize, and it is incredibly important. And Michelle Obama had that great line, says, when they go low, we go high. and that's been being debated about, you know, in the news lately. People think we need to get tougher. But here's my advice. When they go low, we go vote. And that is what has to happen. Look, there's a lot of different diverse organizations here. I mean, everybody in this room, you know, is on the side of the angels in what you do. It's all about uplifting the community. But the work that you do is in large part dependent on whether or not the government, especially at the federal level, provides the resources. If they start gutting things like SNAP, if they start cutting people off of health care, if they stop cutting money for affordable housing, if they start cutting money for education, I mean, we're all going to feel it here. I mean, this is a big deal. And I don't want to end on a sour note here, because I really am hopeful. And I'm hopeful for this reason. I actually believe in the goodness of the American people. And you know, campaigns, anyone who tells you that they love campaigns when they're in a campaign is a little, you know, not all there. But I will tell you that one of the benefits of being in a campaign is you go out and you have to go and you talk to everybody. I mean, everybody you can see, young and old, everybody in between, workers, people who are struggling, and I feel this kind of renewed sense of activism out there that I just haven't felt in the past. There are people who are going to show up, I believe, on November 6th that we've never met, you know, that have never gone to a political meeting, that have never, you know, signed a petition, but who are deeply disturbed by what is happening and who want to get this country on the right direction. I've been to high schools. I mean, listen to the news say, "Oh, young people aren't going to show." I've lost count of how many high schools I've been to. When I asked the seniors, "How many of you are 18?" You know, they raised their hand. "How many of you are registered to vote?" Almost every one of them are registered to vote. "How many are you going to vote?" They're all going to vote. I mean, that hasn't always been the case. There is this sense of purpose, this sense of renewed activism out there that I haven't seen before. And so I believe things are going to change for the better. I believe that on November 7th, that we're going to all be talking about, you know, how not damage control, but how we build on the initiatives and programs that we know are so important to the people. I think we're going to win, and I think we're going to be able to then start legislating in a way that we're helping people. And by helping people, I'm not talking about just those at the top. I'm talking about everybody. And so I am grateful to be here. I'm grateful to my colleagues in government. I do want to say to Steve Kulik, we're going to miss you. We appreciate your unbelievable service to our community. I mean, you are unbelievable. And I'm grateful to my other colleagues. You know, we actually like each other, right? It's great to work with a great team like that. But I want to thank you for keeping the faith. You know, Mother Teresa there's this great Mother Teresa quote that I've been invoking in these last couple of years about the need that you need to keep on struggling even if you're not successful. She says, what we're called upon is not to be successful, we're called upon to be faithful. And I think, you know, we have all of you have kept the faith. But, you know, and so that's important, right? We don't want to lose the faith. But I'm ready to be successful. So I thank you for having me here, and I thank you for all you do, and let's win this thing and change this country for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman McGovern. Yours are always some of the most important, honest, and sobering words. My name is Kelly Pereira. I am the Family Self-Sufficiency Director for the Greenfield Housing Authority and a co-chair of the Resource Network's Public Policy Task Force. And I just want to take a few quick seconds to thank the other members of the committee who come together every year to make this breakfast a success. My co-chair for the Public Policy Task Force, Alyssa Valbona of the Community Health Center, who's in the back. Michelle Jeffroy from the Food Bank of Western Mass, who you've already seen. And Sarah Cummings from Community Action Pioneer Valley, who is the person, I believe, who started these breakfasts 14 years ago. So I'd also love to introduce to you another extremely present and hardworking legislator who most of us know and recognize for his uncanny ability to be everywhere in this district, even whenever he is asked to be. His leadership, his initiative, and his incredibly memorable laugh. Someone who partnered with me when I had this crazy idea about running a local study to understand gaps in services and barriers to access, which ended up becoming known as the Intercept Zero Project. He's always willing to teach us, constantly available, to help us work with the legislature to leverage our goals. Representative Paul Mark is our amazing House representative for the 2nd Berkshire District, who covers 16 cities and towns throughout Berkshire and Franklin counties, and he also serves as the chair of the House Committee on Redistricting. I am also going to say a few brief words about who he's going to introduce, who is our keynote speaker. Representative Paul Broder is now serving his 4th 2-year term. Representative Broder was first elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives in November of 2010. Appointed in 2017, Representative Broder now serves as the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. Welcome you both.
Good morning, everybody. How's it going? He left, but I love campaigning. And I am a little touched. And I love campaigning so much that even when I don't have an opponent, I still open an office here in Greenfield to support all the other Democratic candidates at my own committee expense. And the reason I do that is because it's important to support people like Jim McGovern. Jim McGovern's too modest to admit this. If the Democrats take back the House, he will be the chair of the Rules Committee, which is one of the most important committees in the Congress. So anything we can do to help him, oh wait, I'm supposed to get political here. Never mind, but it's good to support a good congressman like that. I'm here to talk about the ballot questions, how they work, and how you end up with what's been called the grand bargain, which my friend Paul Broder is actually the lead author and architect of what happened. So ballot questions are governed by Article 48 of the Massachusetts Constitution. And it starts with someone has an idea. They have an idea, could be a good idea, could be a bad idea, but it's something they'd like to see changed or done here in the state level. And it starts off with that person has to get 10 signatures. That's it. You start off getting 10 signatures. You have to take those 10 signatures and you bring them to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office, it has to be submitted by the first Wednesday in August in an odd-numbered year. The Attorney General's office then reviews. Is this something that can qualify for a ballot? Is this constitutional? Is this something that we are allowed to have the people vote on in their own right instead of going through the legislature? If it is approved by the Attorney General's office, then the 10 signatures now turns into 64,750. And that's a percentage of how many people turned out in the last gubernatorial election. That sets the threshold that has to be followed for the next 4 years. They have until the first Wednesday in December to collect 74,750 signatures, have them turned in, have them certified as valid, as actual registered voters by the Secretary of State's office. If that happens, if that threshold is met, then the ballot question moves to the legislature. And so we get a turn to take a crack at it. And so there was, I believe, 12 ballot questions that started off this past cycle. Representative Broder is going to talk about how 3 of them ended up not coming to the ballot. And as we all know, and Joanna is going to talk about in a little while, there's 3 that are still going to appear on the ballot and are going to have a chance. So the legislature has the exclusive right to do something with these ballot questions between January and May. If the first Wednesday in May, the legislature has not taken any action or has taken an action that is not satisfactory to the people who first came up with the ballot question idea, then they have to go back and get more signatures. They go back and get 10,792 more signatures. They have to have those turned in, certified by the first Wednesday in July. So again, up to that point, to that first Wednesday in July, the legislature can still act, and the ballot question people, if they are satisfied with what the legislature does, they can withdraw. But after July, first Wednesday in July, it starts going to the ballot, it's going to end up printed on the ballots, and there's no way to get it off. And if people remember, a couple of years ago, there was a ballot question about what's called right to repair for car parts. And right to repair, there was actually a compromise agreed to in the legislature, but at the same time, it appeared on the ballot as well. And so it was funny, because you actually had two competing ideas for the same thing, and then and they both passed. So then we cleaned it all up afterwards, which is what we like to do sometimes. And so now to talk about how the actual bargaining process goes when this is in the legislative arena between January and May. What deals are made, what ideas are considered. We're very lucky to have a good friend of mine, Paul Broder, who comes all the way from Melrose. So the congressman was talking about his drive from Worcester. This gentleman watched the Red Sox game all the way to the end last night, and then still got up at 5 a.m. to take the 2-hour-plus commute out here to be with all of you. And that's not unusual for a man like Paul Broder. I first met him when we were both elected in 2010. I met him at the Legislative Academy. Natalie, you're going to love it. And in that time, when I first met him, well, we became friends because both of our names are Paul. His birthday is 2 days before mine, plus 15 years, but basically 2 days apart.
You know which way.
And he sits in front of me in the chamber, even by an amazing coincidence. We've had the chance to work on a lot of important legislation together. He's been a friend to Western Massachusetts. He's been out here a lot of times. He's been in this very room for a Ways and Means hearing in the past. I've had the opportunity to travel with him. I've actually been a roommate with him on not one, not two, but 3 different continents of this earth. And so I couldn't be more pleased for him to come here and to share what happened with all of you. So thank you, Paul Broder.
Well, needless to say, you all have known Paul for a long time. And you have a tremendous state representative. Though he did sell me a bit of a bill of goods. I had prepared some remarks about how the state can do more for Greater Boston, and I'm not sure that that's going to go over too well out here. And I want to thank Congressman McGovern for his words, for his service. I had the opportunity to meet the congressman when his mentor, Joe Moakley, passed away, and Jim served on his staff for a long, long, long time, and I know that Congressman Moakley, one of the great leaders in the Massachusetts delegation, of which there have been many, would sure be proud of Congressman McGovern and the work he's doing. It was a little bit doom. Apparently, it can get worse. Was I think the message that Jim was given to us a little bit. But his remarks were very much hopeful. And I know that you all take them to heart. I know he's been a good friend to this area. I got to tell you, it is a little bit intimidating to speak about legislative process or the details of what goes on at the State House when someone like Steve Kulik is in the audience. It's kind of like when when you're in kindergarten and you're given your first presentation ever, and the master that's there and knows everything is sitting right in front of you. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but I will do my best. And Steve, please feel free to correct me if I go astray. So Paul painted a very accurate picture of how the process works in theory. And I guess I would say up front that I think the attitude of all involved in the process that I'm going to try to describe at least a little bit is the exact opposite of what Congressman McGovern was talking about in terms of trying to move policy forward in Washington. We had 3 very popular ballot questions dropped into the middle of a dynamic where President Trump was elected and the political energies that kind of unleashed. We had a proposal for paid family and medical leave, which has been kicking around the legislature, quite frankly, for 20 or more years in some way, shape, or form. We had a minimum wage. We had a couple of different pieces of minimum wage legislation which has become, as income equality has become a driving force or a preeminent issue in our politics. That was also on the ballot. And a sales tax cut that would have taken, that is, those of y'all are advocates and rely on state funding, a couple things. The sales tax is regressive compared to some of the other taxes we do. But you also know, based on the work a lot of you do every day, trying to fill in a hole of about $1 to $1.2 billion a year would put Massachusetts into quite frankly, a bigger hole, into bigger challenges as we try to face our expanding needs in transportation, education, human services, all the things that make Massachusetts a great place to live and work and do business. So that kind of sets the table a little bit. And so the leadership in the legislature, the leadership in the governor's office, and in the advocacy groups and in the business community kind of all wanted to take a good run at seeing whether or not we could try to settle up all these things without necessarily going to the ballot. Again, my best guess is that each of the three would have passed. By far the most complicated thing we needed to address was this idea of a paid family and medical leave program, which very few states have, and even fewer have constructed where an employer shares part of the cost of that program. We're essentially creating a new benefit program almost from scratch. Again, there are a couple places that have done it. No one's really fully implemented it yet. Huge challenge, because we want to, make sure we address a need that cuts across almost all socioeconomic or ethnic or groups within Massachusetts. Everyone believed in the generic idea of paid family medical leave. You will hear correctly that of all the nations in the world, sometimes we talk about just the industrialized nations, just about every nation in the world offers some kind of support like we were going to be considering in the paid family medical leave legislation. But to do it, we wanted to make sure of a couple things. We wanted to make sure that it was solvent going forward, that we could sustain this program over time. We wanted to make sure that the businesses understood it and the general public understood it, and that it would be embraced by society in general, because if we had those barriers to entry, no one would actually be able to use the benefits. So we could have done things like there's some discussion about paid family and medical leave even from the Trump administration, but it tends to be structured so that you can't really use it. If you think about the federal law that we have to protect folks, FMLA, right? You have a right to leave, but you don't have a right to pay during that time, which means for the vast majority of people that want to access those protections, they can't, because they can't afford it. We were very mindful of that. We were also very mindful of, or actually became educated on, I guess I would say, the fact that there are employers in Massachusetts that do offer programs that, quite frankly, are better than what is in the legislation. I'm biased. I think it will be, when it's rolled out, the best program in the country, but there are still employers. Now, granted, these are employers in the most competitive parts of the economy, like tech, that almost have to offer these things to bring people in, to retain them, this is a very competitive job market. But we needed to, or it was important to the business community, and I think made sense to everyone at the table, to have the opportunity for companies to continue existing programs if they were good programs. Minimum wage, a little bit more straightforward in certain respects. With paid family medical leave, you literally had to define the benefit program, in this case define who can opt out and under what circumstances, decide who's going to decide those questions, how are we going to fund it, when are we going to implement it, all those things have to, and that was by far the most substantial part of the bill. But minimum wage, in some respects, from an implementation perspective, it's pretty easy. You decide who it covers, you pick a number, and you set a schedule, right? It's all private sector, and then folks like the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development and the Attorney General's office, they get to enforce it, and off you go. That's pretty easy. Same thing in some respects with the sales tax. You pick a number, you set a rate, and then let DOR and those folks do their thing, and you take in whatever revenue that generates. That's that sets the stage at a little bit of a deeper level. So how do we proceed? The first thing we had to do was, I said, in some respects, convince the business community that there was value in having these discussions, because our initial discussions, this myself and Senator Lewis, who's the Senate Chair of Labor and Workforce Development, saw the polling and thought, well, what's the point? And we'll be negotiating against ourselves. And in some respects, they were right. They did not have a lot of leverage in the process, because ultimately, each person who filed, as Paul said, each person who filed a group that filed one of these initiatives is the ultimate decider of whether or not they actually go to the ballot. So if we came up with a deal that was, $14.75 was where the minimum wage lands, and made other very, very attractive parts of a proposal, they could still say, no, we're going to the ballot. Fairly complicated when it's just one question. When you're trying to put all these moving parts together, a little bit more complicated. The good news is this: they eventually bought in. Probably the most time we spent in certain respects was getting to the first substantive meeting, getting a comfort level together, getting a trust level together. The people in the room kind of, probably all the people you might expect: organized labor, SEIU, 509, 1199, the Mass Teachers Association, some of the commercial retail workers were in the room at some points, Mass Restaurant Association, Retailers Association of Massachusetts, some of the bigger, more broad-based groups like the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, Boston Business Roundtable, Associated Industries of Mass. I can tell you, I come from a liberal democratic perspective, and so I don't know a lot of these people. I was very pleasantly surprised at the attitude, at the desire, if possible, to get to yes. Now, I don't want to leave you with the impression that everyone just rolled over or everyone was delighted with the outcome, because that is not true. I can tell you with a great deal of confidence, there are people that are dissatisfied, people that continue to be dissatisfied, and I suspect we haven't heard the last of any of these issues, as you might imagine. But here's what we came up with. We came up with a minimum wage proposal that very closely tracks, in my opinion, what the advocates of the Raise Up Coalition were looking for. So we did get to $15 an hour. It will take a year longer to get there than what was proposed under the ballot question. We did a significant increase in the tipped minimum wage, not as high, again, as some of the advocates wanted, and even the advocates were a little bit split on this idea of, should we kind of continue the same model, or should we eliminate the tip minimum wage altogether? And I suspect we will continue to hear about that as well, particularly in the context of so many of the events we've been talking about, locally, on the state level, and nationally. Paid family medical leave, again, a super, super complicated thing, and the way that the contribution system will work is essentially a 50-50 split between employer and employee. So there's kind of a sharing of that cost. It is job protected, which is very important, because that means if you take that leave, you can't be fired while you take the leave. You know that when you finish up that leave, you will come back. Again, very important because you want people to actually be able to access this benefit. This, I believe, will be such a game changer for modern families that live in a complex world where moms and dads are taking care of kids, taking care of grandparents. There's a spectrum of medical needs we finally have in the state under this legislation. What we've come to call bonding leave, so that if you welcome a child into your family via birth or adoption, however you do it, you will have an opportunity to spend some time with your child, that critical formative time, without sacrificing economically. And so the benefit package, depending on which part of the benefit you access, there's the bonding, there is leave protection if you need to deal yourself with a serious medical condition. There is a kind of a separate piece of it, so if you're helping a loved one deal with a serious medical condition. All that goes into the mix, and the reason why the contribution thing is a little bit more complicated, as we learned along the way, there are tax implications depending on how you pay for it and what you use it for. So believe me when I tell you, I learned a lot. I have a great deal of respect for tax lawyers and CPAs that I might not have had before. But I believe we are at a good place because you will be able to help families. And when we start, and I think that's the business y'all are in, helping individuals, helping families. Minimum wage is, in some respects, the simplest thing we can do to raise people up. There are about 1 million people in Massachusetts that hold minimum wage jobs. And you combine that with some of the work the legislature has done with the Earned Income Tax Credit, we're really making a difference for folks that are low-income working folks. And again, in terms of the complexity of everyday life and being able to manage your family, your life, the things that come up, we are long since past the days of nuclear family, dad goes to work, mom stays home, still works her ass off, but mom stays home. We're slowly but surely adopting to that reality. And I like to think we've established Massachusetts, as we've done in a lot of other areas, established Massachusetts in a leadership position in terms of working together as a Commonwealth, kind of across the spectrum, to make people's lives better. It's not happening in Washington. We're doing our best here in Massachusetts. I hope you're proud of the work we've done. I hope you will stick with us as we roll it out and continue to offer your suggestions and let us know, quite frankly, if it's working, how we can do it better, and how it's impacting the people that you're dedicated to serving. And with that, I'm not exactly sure what the schedule is. I'm happy to take questions either now or I think we're doing a thing later. We're good? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much.
So we asked a bunch of people to come and talk about their reasons that they think it's important to participate in democracy and why it matters to vote. In reading some of the remarks of this next group, I was personally really moved and sort of emotional thinking about the power that it has. I wasn't brought up in a family that instilled an understanding of political power, but I have worked in the realm of social work and social services, and I believe with my whole being that we should, as the ACLU puts it, vote like your rights depend on it. Please welcome the following brave friends.
Good morning. I'm Jen Audley. I'm here today as an elected town meeting member in the town of Montague, and also an appointed member of the Finance Committee in the town of Montague. And I think that many of the people who follow me are going to talk about why it's important to vote. And I do think it's incredibly important to vote. What I actually want to talk about is why it's important to be at the table as a person who is an elected or appointed official who's also voting. So, the one step further. And I want to talk about how optimistic I am, because on a local level in my own community, I feel like in the last couple of years I've really seen a big sea change. And I think we're making upstream, I work in prevention during my day job, and I think we're making upstream changes that are going to change the political climate in Franklin County, and hopefully I think that will extend into our state and into the world. So I was not a person who was into politics when I was growing up. I always saw things like running for school council as a popularity contest, and I wasn't interested in participating in that at all. And when I moved to Franklin County 14 years ago, one of the things that happened is that now I lived in a small town. And I also started to care. I moved a lot when I was a kid, and I have lived here now for 14 years. And so I cared more about how things worked and about understanding them. And I started to understand that I had power and I could make a difference in my community, but I had to engage. And so I, frankly, ran for town meeting because I kept hearing over and over again that there were all these empty seats and not enough people to do the work. And I was like, well, I care about this community, I'll do the work. And so I ran unopposed. There were like 7 seats in my precinct every year. And that year only 5 people were running, so I got my 10 signatures, got on the ballot, got elected. It was not a competitive process for me. And I went to my first town meeting, and what I saw was that half of the people who got elected were not there. And then I also saw that I only knew so that means there were 60 people in the room instead of 120. So of those 60 people, I knew 10, knew them, knew their name. And of those 60 people, 5 guys did all the talking. And everybody else just sat there and waited for the meeting to be over. I felt unwelcome, and I felt ineffective. And I went home from that first town meeting and I realized, now I'm inside of it. So it is within my power to make change in this system. And so what I've been working on over the past 3 years is trying to make people feel more welcome when they are new town meeting members and be more effective. And so we just had a special town meeting in October. And I can tell you again, half the people didn't show up. But at this year's town meeting, of the 60 people who were in the room, I knew 40. And the people who spoke were much more diverse. And people asked questions, and people knew what they were doing. So I guess that's my point, is that this election matters to me because I feel much more engaged in the process, and I feel like I have power. And I hope that you feel that way too.
My name is Sarah Ahern. I am a National Addiction and Recovery Advocate, and I currently serve as the Vice Chair of the Human Rights Commission for the City of Greenfield. Before I begin my remarks today, I'm going to invoke the words of one of my recovery mentors, Dr. Haner Hernandez. What I'm about to say is going to make some of you very uncomfortable. I'm okay with that, because we need to be. I have a little something for you today. It's called solidarity. Why should you vote? Because the Civil Rights Act passed in 1964 outlawing discrimination based upon race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Yet, in 2018, a young man of color raises awareness of inequality, discrimination, and unfair criminal justice system for his people in the most respectful way a football player can by taking a knee and is demonized. because the check written in 1964 guaranteeing all men certain unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and is still coming back stamped insufficient funds. Because, like Dr. Martin Luther King, I refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity in this nation. For these reasons, I stand in solidarity with my marginalized brothers and sisters. Why should you vote? Because the Stonewall riots occurred more than 30 years ago, launching the gay rights movement. Yet in 2018, in the most liberal state in the Union, there's a ballot question that seeks to end protection against discrimination for our LGBTQIA brothers and sisters. For these reasons, I stand in solidarity with my LGBTQIA brothers and sisters. Why should you vote? Because the ERA never passed, the glass ceiling never smashed, and currently sitting on the highest court in the land are 2 men accused of sexually assaulting women. Because for the first time in a generation, a woman's right to make choices about her body is in jeopardy. For these reasons, I stand in solidarity with my Me Too sisters and all women across the country. Why should you vote? Because in 1976, Al Gore warned a nation about climate change and was ridiculed. Because a sitting U.S. president documented the radical changes to the Alaskan wilderness and was disbelieved. Because a recent climate report now warns of a catastrophic climate event by 2040 that could impact humankind if we don't reverse course. For these reasons, I stand in solidarity with Mother Earth. Why should you vote? Because for 46 years, funding never flowed westward, affecting jobs, education, transportation, and our economy. Because the National Railway was rehabbed from north to south and west, but not the Berkshires, and the politicians in Boston claim more studies are needed for railway rehab from west to east. Because our rural district still has the only transit authority with no evening or weekend service, disenfranchising our rural residents from across Western Mass to basic needs access. For these reasons, I stand in solidarity with my 401(c) brothers and sisters. Why should you vote? Because in 2 years' time, we have lost 150,000 lives to unintentional drug overdose, the equivalent of 2 Vietnam Wars and total American casualties, yet no true federal response. And stigma and lack of access to vital treatment still exists in many areas of the Commonwealth and across the country. For these reasons, I stand in solidarity with my recovery peers and all family members of loss. Why do I vote? Because I matter and I can't keep quiet.
Hi, my name is Michael Sullivan. I'm 18 and I'm a student here at GCC. This past year was my first year voting. Growing up, my dad was very politically active, and he always would explain to me and talk to me about whatever was going on, you know. So I grew up knowing it was important to, you know, pay attention, just be aware. I think it's extremely important that no matter, you know, what side it is, you should try to do your best to understand both sides, because I think it makes it important to understand both sides in order to make your final decision. Voting is important and it matters. I know sometimes people think it doesn't, but it does. For example, recently with Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, it came down to 3 to 4 key votes by people that we elect. It doesn't matter what your views are or what your party is. It comes down to who you think will best represent your voice. Particularly, I think for young people in my generation, we have a huge task. It's our job to decide what the future looks like and what we end up with. I think this is especially true right now. The future is uncertain, and the question is, what are we going to do to solve the problems? I think being informed is extremely important. In my senior year of high school, I took a AP government class, and what disturbed me the most was some people in that class took it so they could have, say like, oh, on my shiny resume, I took AP government. And it was like, that's not what it's about. It's about understanding and being active. And I think that's very, very important, especially for my generation and what we're gonna have to do. So I think voting is a very important step in that direction to solve our problems. Thank you.
Sit. 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 Hello, my name is Madeline Malloy. That's Stella. Stella is my service dog. Give you a quick little background on me. For 10 years, I did direct care, taking care of mentally disabled adults. Part of my job was advocating for their needs, their health, their general way of life. I became disabled myself after severe trauma. And I realized there's nobody out there really advocating for people who have become disabled or have lost homes or don't have any ability to advocate for themselves. If somebody doesn't stand up and voice the needs of people and fight for equality and basic human decency, what kind of people are we? We have to vote. Nothing will change if we do not take a stand. Nothing will get better if we don't speak out. I didn't ask to be put in a position to speak for a group of people. I was asked to, and it fell upon me. And if I can change one person's mind, I think we all should step up to that plate. There needs to be better ways of doing things, and that rests upon everyone in this room. We all have a duty to make things better for everyone. We pick somebody who is going to represent our values. And if you don't vote, you don't have a choice. You get stuck with what you get stuck with. You can't complain if you haven't made a choice. Make an educated one. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tim Ranny Blake. I'm extremely happy to be here today. And Kelly's done a great job. And the reason she hasn't read any of my remarks is because I'm still writing them. I'm going to invoke someone that I learned about. His name is Reverend Vernon Johns. He was the minister at the church immediately preceding Martin Luther King in Montgomery, Alabama. And he was kind of too radical. And they got rid of him, and they hired this young kid to come in and didn't realize how much more they were getting. And the reason I think of Vernon Johns is because he had something that he said quite a bit, which is, if you see a good fight, get in it. I come from people who did not have rights to vote. I had the fortune of being raised here in Western Massachusetts. I had the fortune of being raised not only in Western Massachusetts, but I can talk to you endlessly about what it was like to live in the 50s and 60s in Indian Orchard. And sense of fair play. I'm a middle kid. I know fair play. That was my job. So I was reading the Constitution the other day, as one does. And as a language arts teacher, I love the sentence at the very beginning of the Constitution. It's one sentence. Lots of verbs, lots of adverbial phrases. And I vote because resilience in defiance of adversity requires action. Think of Fannie Lou Hamer when she pulled Lyndon Johnson off of his White Tower and had to come down and talk because she was saying, no, this isn't right. And in 1964, he thought he had a smooth way, and he had to come down off of his tower to meet this person who had been beaten up because she wanted to vote. Being a citizen is belonging. It's not just fitting in. And I think about the phrase that says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I vote for the people who taught and fought and tried and died for us to be able to do this. And other than my own parents, who taught me that on voting day, you put on your best bib and tucker and you go downtown, you put on the mantle of citizen and you participate. Because too many people told us we weren't able to. Too many people said you aren't available to. Too many people right now today are starting to figure out how they can carpool and drive 50 miles to vote. Because nothing in that regard has changed. People are still trying to keep other people from voting. And Ralph and Catherine Blake made sure that their children, every single morning, we had to do the inspection. I literally remember the spot right here. That's where my mother, when she got finished looking at the front, she'd touch your shoulder. Turn around, all the way. Those shoes need a little buffing up. Go downstairs and check that out. But when we got to school, there was a man named Joseph Gorman. We didn't do well by Mr. Gorman. We were kids. He was the teacher, so we gave him a rough time. But when he got back at us, we didn't write 100 times, "I will not talk in class." We wrote 50 times the preamble to the Constitution of the United States of America. That's why I vote, because in that preamble is our best chance. So I'm going to be at the polls, and my outfit is going to be fabulous. Because the accumulation of these 68, almost 69 years is that I am a black, gay, military-era veteran. I have been married to the same man for 34 years. Oh, we had to get married again in 2004, so we've got a 200% success rate when it comes to marriage. So if anybody wants to get divorced, I got a free one for you. And it is because of that, everything that I am, that says I will be there at the polls. I hope you will be too.
Hello, my name is Amanda Page, and I am a lifelong resident of Franklin County. So why do I vote? As a woman, a single mother of a son of mixed races who receives special education services, and as somebody who has received mental health services for many years myself, I can't imagine a reason not to. If it were not for those before me who voted to assure that we had social safety nets, health care, and education programs, I'm not sure where I would be today. When my mental health deteriorated to the point that I could barely care for myself. Mental health services paid for by government-funded health care got me back on track. When I couldn't afford an apartment for myself and my son at market rents, government-funded housing programs helped me get a safe, stable home. And when I couldn't afford to go back to school to further my education, government-funded financial aid loans made it possible. As someone who now works in the mental health field in a vocational setting, I see people with permanent disabilities whose lives are made more full simply because our government-funded program gives them a sense of purpose, an opportunity for socialization, and a paycheck. If it weren't for those who voted before me, none of these things would exist. I fear that if we don't continue to vote, these programs will be lost, and those who struggle will never be able to achieve even the little bit that I have, thanks to these programs. If it weren't people fighting and voting for my right to vote as a woman, I wouldn't even have a voice. I vote because it is my duty to my fellow human, particularly to those who still don't have a voice. I vote to set an example for my son and to teach him that positive change does not come from apathy, but from empathy and action. And just to finish with a quote, in the words of Tai Ing-wen, democracy is not just an election, it is our daily life. Thank you.
Hey everybody, some I know I'm Jerry Higgins. It's nice to see so many people here today, and thank you so much. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, everybody, for putting this on, having us here. I really do feel this is probably one of the most important elections of my lifetime. And I wanted to say, I cannot tell you in 2 minutes why I vote, but I can tell you that as a child, all those patriotic songs, America the Beautiful, whose amber waves of grain, whose purple mountain majesties above a fruited plain, took me to those places that I felt connected us all. This land is your land, this land is my land, the Star-Spangled Banner, etc., instilled deep love of what I thought it meant to be an American, how I thought my fellow Americans felt too. Voting is important because I believe in values of enough for everyone, of shared land, hope and help, and the desire and will to value our country and each other. I see my ideals burning up as anger, discord, and fear in the autocratic and theocratic elements among us, as well as from without. And our vote, our service, our love, and our care are remedies, but they require participation and vigilance to safeguard these ideals and to be inclusive rather than exclusive and talk about what separates us and how to heal it. Our votes show our belief in those who say that they're going to fight for our ideals, to honor the best about what it means to be an American. And this is just some of why I vote. And so many of you put it so eloquently, like, yeah, oh yeah, I want to say that too. So thank you all. That was incredibly important. And I also need to say, while I was thinking about what I was going to say, I recognize my bias right now. Don't know quite how to accept this dialectic, except to say, I want to change my inherent racism, xenophobia, and ignorance. I want to be the person that I just talked about more fully. As others have said, if we don't and cannot get back to nonviolent conflict resolution and acceptance of others, and I know it is always a negotiation, right? It's gray, it's not black and white. Nothing much is going to change. And if you're so moved, I've been standing at the Greenfield Town Common Monday and Wednesday from 11:30 to 1, holding a vote sign. But full disclosure, my sign does have a big blue wave. And thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Wow. Thank you all. If that group moved you too, I will just put out a little personal plug to say that there are flyers at the back table about an upcoming hearing for the Hampshire, Franklin, and the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, of which I am a commissioner. We are holding this hearing on October 25th at the Shea Theater from 4:30 to 6:30, and there are flyers in the back. Please notice on your tables that we've created cards for you to use yourselves and to share with community members, referencing the upcoming ballot questions for November 6th. The information there is from the Mass State site, and key facts were pulled to help create some understanding of a yes or a no vote and address how the questions are written, because it's often confusing. Still to come is a brief presentation for and with Representative Kulik and the legislative panel discussion. Up next, though, Joanna Whitney is a board member of the Franklin County chapter of the League of Women Voters. That league is a nonpartisan organization that was founded in 1920 as part of the women's suffrage movement. The league promotes civic engagement and voter education. Welcome, Joanna.
I'm not actually going to talk behind here the whole time, but I do want to point out, I live in a world that has fundamentally different assumptions about who's going to be present that assume I will never be that person. Let's see. So I'm a member of the board, the Franklin County chapter of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts. For those of you who aren't familiar with the League, we're a nonpartisan group. Our historic roots come out of the women's suffrage movement. The thing that probably is the most important thing to understand about the League is we're very jealous about being considered nonpartisan. We want people to engage with the League, to become informed voters, engaged voters, people who are prepared to participate in democracy. Because if we don't have that, we don't have democracy. Anybody who's been paying attention to the news, even as recently as this week, knows that democracy continues to be very contested. There's all kinds of push and pull and push back again, targeting certain segments of the population, making it more difficult for them to vote, or trying to remove those barriers. So it's an ongoing endeavor that we're engaged in. And the only way we succeed to be a democracy is if everybody participates. So, vote. I jokingly say vote early, vote often, but maybe that's not quite the way it works. I also want to mention, you can pass around, the League does have an open meeting coming up. It's on this Sunday from 3 to 4:30 at 170 Main Street. Because it's an open meeting, just if you're interested or you know somebody who's still looking for information, wanting to ask another question or hear what other people think, that would be a place to go and have the opportunity to talk yet again about the decisions that you're trying to make. A place that you can start to get information or get more information, you can go to the Massachusetts Secretary of State's website, select elections and voting. That will take you through a series of steps that will actually get you to a page where you can enter your zip code and see what is going to be on the ballot. So you don't have to be surprised. There's a lot of conversation any given year about the top of the ticket, But then, especially people who are not very experienced or not very engaged in the voting process, there's all kinds of other positions in local communities that you don't know what they are. You don't know who these people are. A way to begin to be more prepared when you go in the voting booth is by seeing the ballot ahead of time and then asking questions, asking people around you, finding people that are maybe a little bit more politically engaged than you are, to ask, who is this person? What does this position do? Why should I care about it? In my family, I come from a big family. We span, my oldest sister lives in Maine. I have a sister who lives in New Hampshire. I live in Western Mass. I have a sister who lives in Salem, so we span Massachusetts. I have a sister who lives in Georgia and a sister who lives in Florida. So our political conversations are pretty interesting. They include the youngest members of our family who are online as well, so they get to see how their parents, their cousins, talk about these kinds of issues and educate ourselves. What do you think about this issue? Oh, this is going on in Maine and this is how it's played out. Oh, this is what's going on in Florida and this is how it plays out. It gives younger family members an opportunity to say, here are things that I really care about. My niece has 2 young boys and childcare is a big issue for her. I have a nephew who's a veteran and those kinds of issues. Coming back out of service and figuring out how you're going to have a job are all really important ways for them to begin to understand the election process and how it connects with their life. As you start to do that with whatever the thing is that is important to you, it allows you to also start to have conversations with the people around you. They may not all share your top issue. Mine, no big surprise, is often about healthcare and disability issues. But because this is a conversation I have with family and friends, they know that if something's coming up, they can come to me, and I probably know something about it. I know something about the pros and cons, and different positions that people are bringing to the conversation. My nephew is beginning to learn how to have that same conversation about veterans issues. That is an awful lot of the way that you begin to learn how to be a member of a functioning democracy. We have a handout sheet, I don't know, is it in the back of the room, that the League has put together summarizing our positions on the ballot questions. To help you know a little bit about that process, the League functions at multiple tiers. There's the National League, there's state leagues, and then there's local leagues. When we start to look at ballot questions, it's typically a 2-year process. And we meet and we discuss, and we meet at the national level, we meet at the state level, we meet at the local level. We talk about all kinds of different issues that we think the ballot question impacts. We do an extensive study of those issues, and then we vote. And at every level, because it's a nonpartisan group, you're getting voters who are coming from across the political spectrum, so that as we take a position, it's what finally has risen to the top of the process. One of the reasons that we are not taking a position on ballot question 1 is because there was strong support on both sides of that issue within our membership. So that's sometimes the way a vote comes out. The other ballot questions 2 and 3, we're urging a yes vote on those 2 ballot questions. I also want to note that there's going to be a non-binding referendum question about single-payer health care on the ballot, just so that, heads up, if you're not aware of that one, you might want to if you're not already thinking about single payer, you might want to be aware that that's something you're going to have to make a decision about as well. Let's see, what else can I tell you? The Newton chapter of the League of Women Voters has been doing forums on the ballot questions that have been videotaped, and the forums for ballots question 2 and 3 are already online. Our handout sheet has the information about how to link to that page. The forum on ballot question 1 was just held last night. So I don't imagine it's up right this second, but it will be coming up pretty quickly. And they have people speaking on pros and cons of those issues. So again, you can go in to that website, link to the forums, and see what people had to say on that if you're still trying to understand, especially with ballot question 1, where people are taking both sides of those positions. And vote.
Thank you, Joanna. The legislators want to come up and take a seat at the table? That would be great. There is a handout at the registration table about the League of Women Voters ballot questions, and hopefully you've noticed that we have ballot questions on the tables about each one. Those are for you to take and share and become educated on. So thank you all for coming, and thank you to the presenters before me, especially the community members who were brave enough to join us and share their stories of what the election means to them. It was very heartfelt. My name is Sarah Cummings, and I helped start the Franklin County Resource Network over 16 years ago, and helped organize our first legislative breakfast 14 years ago. And my, how times have changed and how we've grown. It's great. We wanted to take a few minutes in the program to thank Steve Kulik for his commitment to the Franklin County Resource Network. Steve has been a supporter since the very beginning. He or his aide would often come to our monthly meetings to listen to what we were doing and what we were struggling with. And he, in turn, would come and educate us on what we needed to do when, within the state ballot process, to protect our funding or to request funding or to support a bill. He responded to our emails and stayed connected. And if my memory serves me right, which it often doesn't lately, Steve, I think, attended every legislative breakfast we have held. Do you think that's true? Good. It's pretty amazing, pretty amazing. One of the key reasons we started the legislative breakfast is because Steve and Chris Donnellan, way back when, wanted to better understand the barriers preventing people in rural Franklin County from being self-sufficient. They wanted a place they could go to hear the stories and learn from people about why they were struggling, what the obstacles were, what was needed, and what they could do on the state level, and what we could do together on the local level. Steve once said to me that it is the stories that he carries with him back to the State House, stories of heartbreak, of resilience, of hope that helps inform his work. Steve, your commitment to attending our breakfast every year is a reflection of how you did your work across your district. You were present, you were interested, you listened, you were engaged, you were concerned and thoughtful, you worked tirelessly to solve issues, and you helped guide us through some very tough times. I know there has been a number of events in recognition of your service, and I'm sure there's more to come. and I know probably you have received a lot of gifts. And we have one more for you today. It's big because we wanted a way for you to remember our faces and read our gratitude for all you have done for this country. And I hope that every once in a while you can pull this picture out of your closet and smile at the people smiling back at you. We will miss you.
Thank you. What a great gift. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate your words, Sarah, very much. It has been a pleasure to be here with you at every one of these legislative breakfasts and many other events over the years. Meetings, some difficult meetings about challenging issues that face our citizens, particularly those who are most in need of support and help from those of you who work at the many great agencies in Franklin County and those of us who serve in the legislature. And as Sarah said, I have counted on this group and each of you individually, collectively, to inform me to do my work better. And I was asked to do a little reflecting. I'm going to really abbreviate that because I know we're running very short on time this morning. But I did want to think about my colleagues who are over here to my left. I wanted to give a shout out to them and the colleagues that I served with who came before them. But working with Paul Mark and Susanna Whips as part of this delegation serving this county, and also Senator Adam Hines. I'm so glad John Gould is here representing him. This delegation today and in the past has, I think, made a mark that's disproportionately impactful for a small delegation representing a rural area 100 miles and more west of Boston. And one of the reasons is that we have worked together. We don't fight with each other. And that's not always true. Paul can probably testify, Paul Broder can testify that it's not always this big happy family in the legislature, and particularly not in eastern Massachusetts. And sometimes we see that as our advantage when we can speak with one voice representing your interests. And I think historically, those who you have sent to Boston to represent you, I go all the way back to my friend Bill Benson when he was a state representative. Those many years ago, I won't say how many, but there's just a sense of representing the values and the quality of life here that I think comes from you through us and reflects on the work that we can do for you. And it's been a tremendous privilege for me personally to do that with my colleagues, with all of you. And I was asked to talk a little bit about the changes in the delegation since I am leaving. There's going to be a new state senator for Franklin County. And actually, in the Upper Pioneer Valley, when you look at Hampshire counties and Franklin counties together, there's tremendous turnover this year. 5 new legislators will be entering office on January 2nd. 4 state representatives and a new senator. So I'm so pleased Joe Comerford is here. I'm so pleased Natalie Blais is here. Down in the districts currently represented by John Sybeck and Solomon Goldstein Rose, there will be new representatives, as well as the district in Northampton and surrounding communities that our late friend Peter Cocott represented so well. So
Enormous change in Hampshire and Franklin County legislative delegations. I know that's caused some angst throughout this political year. I don't think it needs to at all. I think that the people who are going to be succeeding me and those other legislators are going to do a great job, and they are going to hit the ground running, and they're going to work so well with Susanna and Paul and all of the other legislators on Beacon Hill in representing you. I have full confidence in their abilities because of their life experiences, all a little bit different. Different perspectives, but they cherish the values that you all epitomize, and they're going to support your work both individually and in your agencies and collectively as organizations. Franklin County is really unique in that it has a history of collaboration, of people working together. And I think it's partly because we are so removed from the seat of power, so to speak, in Boston, and that we're a small area, or small population in a large area. So you can't do things in silos, you can't do things alone, you have to do things together. And I know our new delegation is going to do that. They're going to represent you really, really well. I'm confident that they're going to continue the kind of work that Susanna and Paul and Adam do and be a part of a really effective team. So with that, I just want to thank you all so much for the privilege of representing you for 25 years. It's enriched my life a great deal to learn about the values and the issues that you care about and to represent you. I'm not moving out of state or anything. I'll still be around, and you can bet I'm going to be voting on November 6th. I want to thank all of those people who spoke earlier about why it's important to vote and to be engaged. And I want to commend the committee for putting this subject before us today, because as Jim McGovern said at the outset of this morning, there is no more consequential election than this year's in my lifetime, I think. Sure, there have been moments in the past during the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights era, or whatever, when we felt, under the gun, this was really critical. But this year, I feel different about it. And so we may feel we're lucky in Massachusetts that we don't face some of the voter suppression issues in other states and some of the choices in candidates that are in other states. But we can't take it for granted. We have to be engaged and make sure that our friends and families are all engaged. So again, thank you for all you do. Thanks for the opportunity to represent you. And now I guess we're going to have a discussion led by the great Claire Higgins. So thanks, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Lunch is being prepared. I do want to offer Rep. Roeder the opportunity to exceed Representative Kulik's attendance record at the Franklin County Resource Network breakfast. You are welcome to come.
Well, my district, I can drive across in about 20 minutes, and I think I don't get to have as much stuff as Steve does.
Oh, there you go.
I'll do my best.
Okay. Well, in order to get where we are here in Western Massachusetts, we have to, what is it? It's sort of like what they used to say about Ginger Rogers. We have to dance backwards in high heels. No, not literally, but it takes a lot more work to get a lot of stuff done. And these guys are, Susanna and Paul and Steve and the rest of the delegation are awesome. Now it's sort of, we build this as a conversation. It's going to be a quick conversation. I hope the reps don't mind if I dispense a little bit with introductory remarks and go straight to questions from people who have been sitting here and see what's on their mind. Is that helpful? Okay. So I know there's questions, and I see a microphone. There's somebody being Oprah in the audience. Oh, it's Alyssa. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and Alyssa will come over with the mic. Oh, come on. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I was going to have to call on people.
This is a question for Paul Mark and Senator Hines is a representative. It's kind of a shame that he's not here today. But my question is this, since I brought up transportation and it's such a key issue here in Western Mass, and I know that Senator Hines has done some really amazing things in Berkshire County. What is your plan to prevent the stalling, I'll just call it that, I'll be kind, the stalling of the west to east rehabbing of our railway so that our residents have quick access to Boston when we need it.
Yeah, Senator, can you hear me? Yeah. Senator Hines isn't here because he's actually at the ribbon cutting for the Taconic High School in Pittsfield, which I'm happily missing to be with all of you today. So, even though that only would have been a 10-minute drive for me versus an hour. So what we've been doing to try to support rail service, and Senator Hines has actually been a pretty in the forefront of trying to get rail service established for the Berkshire specifically. He's been successful in getting an item in the state budget that's going to allow for what they're calling the Berkshire Flyer, which is a rail service that will connect New York City to Pittsfield, at least on the weekends, and so hopefully will allow for some engagement. We had been trying to get rail service directly from New York City on a regular basis to the Berkshires, and unfortunately the state of Connecticut isn't willing to take part in that, and so without going through Connecticut, it's really hard to get from New York to Boston. Here in the Pioneer Valley, we've actually been really successful. We were able to get, and Congressman Olver and Congressman McGovern and Congressman Neal had a lot to do with this, getting the Amtrak service reestablished from all the way down to Washington, D.C., as far north as Burlington, Vermont. And in 2014, in the Transportation Bond Bill, Representative Kulik, myself, Representative Kokott, Senator Rosenberg, we were able to get an earmark included that will allow for commuter rail service between Springfield and Greenfield, and that's planned to start in the spring. So it's taken over 4 years for them to get the actual plan and to get things up and running, but we're going to see it's going to happen in the spring, and so it's really important. If people want more rail service, you have to use it. You have to ride it. You have to show people that control the purse strings that, yes, this is something we will use. It's a two-way street, no pun intended, that if you want something, you have to show that people are going to fight for it and engage in it and make the most of it. And so with that, if that program is successful, it's going to add steam to the drive to try to get the east-west rail service going as well. East-west has been more of an obstacle and more of a hurdle. It's been a lot of success expanding the rail service out as far as the Worcester area and trying to make those improvements. But now to get it from Worcester to Springfield, to get it from Fitchburg, in theory, along Route 2 and out to Greenfield and even out to North Adams, I mean, it's important and it's something we want to fight with. It's going to be very expensive and it's going to take a lot of time. But when I look at Greenfield and I look at North Adams and I look at Athol and I look at Gardner and you think, what's missing here? Why are these places not as vibrant as the rest of the state? That's a big part of it, is the lack of transportation. We're very isolated, and Greenfield's lucky because we have Interstate 91 going through, and we do have some north-south rail service. But yeah, it has to be a component, and I've been honored to file amendments to try to get the bus service running here on the weekend and do a lot of things, and there's a lot to do, but we'll keep pushing, as you know. Thanks.
We have one in the back.
So that leaves room for no more questions. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Oh, is there no more?
Yeah, there will be no filibustering.
It's a complicated question, you know.
It is a complicated question, that's for sure. Yeah.
Can I just do it? Is it teasing? Oh, okay. No more questions. I just had a follow-up on that because it seems to me that part of the issue could be that I can be completely wrong, sorry if I am, but poverty is an issue, that people want to use these services but literally don't even have the money to necessarily ride the bus or train. Is there going to be any kind of subsidy? I know it's a hard thing to say, budget purse strings, I understand that, and I don't really fully understand all the processes. I know that it's tough, but what about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is what the problem is, and rail service and public buses are heavily subsidized. And so, for example, there was a bus service that was going from Springfield up through Greenfield, over to North Adams, down to Pittsfield, and then all the way to Albany. And it was heavily subsidized by the state. It was a pilot project. A pilot project means something we're going to try out as a test run. And unfortunately, it's going to end soon because it wasn't successful. People were not riding it. And so it's difficult to know exactly why these services end up not being used, if they're not accessible enough, if they're not regularly enough, if they're not frequent enough. But yeah, every MBTA out in Boston, which this gentleman knows a lot about,
Stops right at the end of my community.
is also heavily subsidized. And it's heavily subsidized by everybody in this room as well, because every time you pay the sales tax, 1 cent of that goes to the MBTA. So trying to get back what we need out here, but I mean, the problem is, of course, poverty, but it's beyond poverty. There's a problem also of geography, density, and population. And so where I live in Peru, there's no bus service coming. It's never coming. And there's no rail service coming. There's nothing. And unfortunately, 11 of the 16 communities I represent are like that. And it's leaves us behind. It's unfortunate. You're welcome.
I have a question about the ballot questions, particularly question 1, in relationship to this, what you were discussing earlier about how, and what in fact occurred with minimum wage and family paid medical leave in the negotiating. What didn't happen in advance of question 1 so that it wasn't resolved before the ballot? Because it seems like such an obvious one in relationship to its complexity that the legislature, that both sides would get together and do some working out. And the corollary question is, assuming if it passes, then I assume this is exactly the instance, to the extent there are some complexities, where the legislature would likely step in and do whatever it needs to do to make it a workable initiative. But I'm curious.
Who wants to field that?
Try that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yikes. Thank you. I think in some respects it's very complicated. In some respects it's very easy. I was not involved with the hearings on the legislation that is now the basis of the ballot question. But kind of reflecting a little bit on what I talked about with all the parties in the room, being willing to chat, I think part of 2 years ago or 4 years ago, I don't remember, was it 4 years ago? There was a compromise negotiated where there would be set staffing levels in the ICUs. There was some concern among various parties about how that rollout worked, and it was kind of a short-term fix. I think part of the problem is the nature of the relationship between the Mass Hospital Association and the Mass Nurses Association is pretty toxic. They've been through a lot of conflicts over the last several years, so there is not really a level of trust, which leads to this kind of a throwdown. As to what happens if it passes and it needs fixing, stay tuned. I mean, I think that depends on a lot of factors. But I think a lot of times people think, well, it's complicated, so why didn't the legislature do something? Well, sometimes we don't, because we don't arrive at a consensus ourselves about what the answer is, or to what degree, what is the appropriate implementation of the idea.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Very briefly, I will say that as we saw 2 years ago, marijuana legislation was passed, and in looking at that as a legislature, we saw that it was a ballot question written by the industry for the industry, and of course, the legislature stepped in to make sure that it was, fair, rolled out properly, and everything else. And 2 years later, you still can't buy a retail joint anywhere, so it does take some time. So I'm confident that if question 1 passes, the leadership in the legislature is going to take a really close look at it and see what might need to be tweaked, what might need to be changed, and how we can roll it out again. We had hoped over years at the bargaining table that the hospital association and the nurses would have come together and come up with some sort of mutually agreeable staffing levels where the legislature wouldn't have to step in. But I'm confident when we look at that on Beacon Hill, the leadership will decide we'll have to sharpen our pencils and change some of the instances. And again, I don't believe it will go into effect right away if it does pass.
So there's a question in the back, and then there's 2 more hands up over here.
Hi, this question is for whoever wants to address it. Going back to the Foundation Budget Review Commission, which issued its report in October of 2015 with the recommendations of how to properly fund and take our public schools to the next level. It found that we were shorting about $2 billion a year. our public schools, half of that for special education. And then there's all the other stuff that happens, transportation, things like that. So first, a thanks for the work that was done on rural sparsity aid, all the efforts about transportation and things like that. But in this past legislative session, we moved forward, and then we didn't get the legislation passed to implement the foundation budget review, the commission report. What's next for that? Is it going to come up this next session? It's really critical because the ripple effect on everybody in this room of how we fund our public schools is felt by everybody. Thoughts?
Yeah, so the biggest problem with that was we were expecting the so-called millionaire's tax to get on the ballot, and the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts ruled that was not eligible to get on to the ballot. So that meant $2 billion of potential new revenue that was going to be available for the state was taken away from us right as the legislative session was coming to an end, as we were considering what would be the best way to change the foundation formula, make sure it's more fair, make sure it's fair for rural people, inner cities, everyone around the state. And so when that happens with less than 2 weeks to go, it makes things a little difficult. But so I fully expect it's going to come right back up in January, and we're going to have to find a new way to fund it. And the millionaire's tax, the surtax, is going to come back in a different form that should survive a court challenge. And again, to amend the state constitution, we're going to have to vote for it twice in the legislative session, and then that should appear on the ballot, I would say, in 2022. So long-term solutions.
So Tim and then MJ.
Again, I'm Tim Randy Blake. I've got a lot of hats. And one of the things that I noticed in our local newspaper, the roll call information about what goes on in the legislature. So yes, I read about all of you. And what I want to do, what I want to do is follow up on that question, and it's about securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. I remember in 1968 being angry that I was not able to vote, yet I could be pressed into combat. And we know that the an amendment was made to the Constitution. Rather than deferring putting kids into combat, they lowered the voting age to 18. So one of our speakers here talked about being 18. One of the things that I noticed is that Massachusetts is going to encourage civics education. I was very happy about that. At the same time, I was very sad about that we don't teach about civics in our public schools. So is there some information that some of you can lend to us about what's going to be happening for the 17-year-olds and the 16-year-olds and the 15-year-olds who we will then later depend on?
So the question is about civics education. Does anybody want to take that one?
Very quickly, the legislation passed with a lot of support, and it directed the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to develop civics curriculum to be made available to all school districts in the Commonwealth. There was debate about whether or not taking a civics course and passing one should be a graduation requirement, as other academic disciplines are. And it was decided not to do that at this stage, but to provide the materials, strongly encourage, and I think probably when we get around to redoing the funding formula for education, or not when we, but they, you know, I think it will be a significant part of the education curriculum across the Commonwealth, absolutely.
MJ had a question, and then I think maybe one more question after that.
Thanks. I'm MJ Adams with the City of Greenfield. An issue that we have been aware of here in the region but became highly visible this summer was the issue of services that we provide to the homeless and the lack of housing options that are available to them. We had the encampment this summer. It resolved itself somewhat, but it made us highly aware of the lack of housing for very low-income individuals. And I'm appreciative that the state has been working with us and that the community has been working with us, but we need to do a better job at coordinating the services that keep people housed so that they can access the services that can help them as they try to improve their life and their journey out of poverty, along the recovery path. And I just want to know where we're going to get these resources, because it feels like the services to the homeless is really siloed in many ways, and we need to find a way to collaborate better among all of the stakeholders, among all the folks who are impacted by this. And I want to hear someone speak to that issue, please.
Anybody? Yeah.
Well, you're very lucky that you can even run into me on the street last night at 5 and we can have this conversation. I mean, you and I have been working on this for quite a while and with greater urgency lately. And so the idea is at the city level and at the regional level and at the local level to make sure that there are opportunities for housing, that there are places where people want to invest in housing, that there's places that people want to share services and collaborate. And then at the state level and even the federal level, what's important is for us to fight then to grab you those resources. And that's why I'm actually really happy, and I know Dan's sitting there, and we had a really great meeting a couple of weeks ago, that we're looking at a way to try to create more local level housing and just try to collaborate more. And where any of you in this room see a barrier, where there's two agencies that aren't communicating, any of us at this table can try to be the bridge over that barrier, to try to eliminate that barrier and try to make sure that there's communication happening. Because unfortunately, a lot of the time, it's a matter of communication. And at the very big picture level, during this legislative session, we actually passed a housing bond bill with over $1 billion to invest in affordable housing throughout Massachusetts. And, a portion of it will come out here. And I think out east there's an idea that, well, land's so cheap and housing's so cheap out west, there shouldn't be any problem. And everyone, they think it's all James Taylor out here, and it really isn't. Surprisingly, Broder, it isn't at all. And so we fight to try to get every single penny we can. But again, I thank you both for the work you're doing, and I said it's an honor to partner with you.
It's just something real quick. It's
Yes, you can.
It's dovetailed a little bit. So I'm from Eastern Mass, where the number one issue is housing production, right? Because the prices are absolutely insane, and that is true an hour outside of Boston, not just in the city itself. So that's a huge problem, and it probably needs to be addressed in different ways across the state, but with zoning reform, kind of in my part of the world, because there is a bit of some very onerous, NIMBY-esque kind of things where, like, in my own community, it's almost impossible just to do an in-law apartment, which is really, for the most part, folks trying to help out a family member. It's not going to put a big burden on the schools, on the transit, on the emergency services, or anything like that. So that, out where I'm from, that's kind of a big deal. But in terms of the committee, the work that the Labor and Workforce Committee is doing in conjunction with the administration, that I want you all to know about, because it's really just kind of starting, is this idea of addressing the cliff effect, which isn't necessarily just germane to housing, but this idea that you can qualify for a whole suite of services and benefits until you might hit a certain income point, and then it all drops off. It all drops away. And so you folks start to think, well, maybe I shouldn't be in the workforce because, as a rational actor, it doesn't make any sense for me to do that. And I think that is part of, what we need to think much more broadly about, is in terms of constructing and maintaining a social safety net that also helps people kind of step out of poverty or move up into better economic opportunity, that we are cognizant of this idea that we need to smooth out that, we need to do something about that cliff, or we're going to continue to be unsuccessful.
One more.
Thank you all so much for being here. I have a question about, sort of a comment and a question about the ballot question 3, which is the transgender anti-discrimination law. And so I am deeply, deeply concerned about this being on the ballot in Massachusetts. It shouldn't be on the ballot. And the reason why it shouldn't be on the ballot is that it is not appropriate for us to have situations where the majority are voting on the rights of a disenfranchised minority. This is a setup for removing important laws. And if these protections are repealed, we will see an increase in death. This is not about access to bathrooms in supermarkets and restaurants, which are all pretty basic, but this is actually a life and death question, because we already know that rates of suicide among young people who identify as trans are, well, for gay kids, the rates are over 3 times as they are for straight kids. And for trans, depending on the studies, because there's basically no good data, we see anywhere between 6 and 12 times higher than their straight peers. So this will be a life and death issue, because every instance of discrimination that a person faces increases their likelihood of self-harm and suicide. So my first question is, what do we do about this issue of why is this on the ballot in the first place, and how did the legislature let it get there that we actually have a ballot question that would legalize discrimination against many of our citizens? And then the second part of that is, if these rights are repealed, what does the legislator do about it to preserve rights for these community members?
Okay, and so
Steve,
yes.
and the day after it passes.
Right.
Steve, go ahead.
Well, I just want to make it clear that this is a citizen-filed repeal of a law, a transgender rights law passed by the legislature. And
It's not the same
It's not.
as
It's not the
the
same as
process I
a
walked through.
right.
It's a different
It is a
thing.
lower threshold for citizens to put a lower threshold in terms of ballot access, the number of signatures they need, to repeal any law that the Massachusetts legislature has passed. And that's how it got on the ballot. The legislature overwhelmingly passed the transgender rights bill. And this is, yes, absolutely. And my guess is that would happen. And just if it makes you feel better, I know we all are a little more skeptical about public polling after 2016 and the presidential election, but consistently, since this was put on the ballot, we knew it would be coming up in November, poll after poll shows between 70 and 75% in favor of retaining the transgender rights law. So I'm optimistic. The Speaker of the House, Bob DeLeo, has been out front on this. He's been a leader across the state in speaking out and getting ahead of this issue. So it has broad support in the legislature. I think we're all talking about it in our districts. And hopefully after November 6th, we won't be visiting this issue again.
Yeah, and I apologize, because what I explained was a process that is in effect 90% of the time, but this is a completely different way. This does not come to the legislature. It is repeal of something we've already done, and everyone at this table voted for this, to put the transgender rights bill in place, and for those of us in longer, voted for it twice. So we will be fighting to prevent this from being repealed, and that's the way to do it. Send a message. Let's win this thing 70%, 75%, and show people that, yeah, we don't tolerate hate in Massachusetts. You don't take away people's rights by ballot question.
Yeah, and just to continue on this, I know the Yes on 3 committee has done a tremendous job getting out there, but people talk about this repealing laws, so you might think you have to vote no to repeal it. The correct vote for this is Yes on 3, and it's something we need to be incredibly clear about to people, again, because of the way the wording is written in the question. It has to be written in an affirmative, not a negative. So the vote is Yes on 3, and again, all of us have been vocal about that. My high school boyfriend's name is Catherine now, and it's been a learning experience for me over the years. And again, just get the word out there and make sure people know the correct vote is yes.
Thank you to our group.
Can I go again?
Yeah, you go again.
This one, I mean, this one is different than everything else we're talking, because it is clearly bipartisan, the way it passed. And kind of to your point about, this is as much about bathrooms as the civil rights fights of the past were about drinking fountains, right? That's just a sham. That's not what this is all about. This is about simple human dignity. Whether you know someone or you don't, you can still put yourself in the shoes of someone who, for whatever reason, has had challenges getting along in the world because of some of the prejudices, misconceptions some folks have. And I like to paint this picture because I think it's kind of a useful talking point if you're out there talking to people that aren't sure about what this is all about. If this law is repealed, we will have a situation where if you apply for a job at a hotel or a restaurant, you'll have the protection of the law regardless of whether the public accommodations piece is pulled away. But we'll have a unique situation, I expect, in Massachusetts if the public accommodations piece is repealed, where you can go to work in that hotel, you can go to work in that restaurant. At the end of your shift, you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to stay the night, or I'm going to sit down and have dinner, and the person who's running that business can say, get the hell out, we don't like your kind. I don't think that's where we want to live, and I think that's something that everyone can understand. To Susanna's point, just keep telling folks yes on 3. Make sure they understand what the right way to vote is to keep this law in place.
So can we have a round of applause for our great legislators that are here? And we've already recognized Representative Kulik. I want to thank him again. He's been just a stalwart for this district and this region for many, many years. And our new Rep. Broder from, I think he's from the 3rd Franklin. We'll see him next year. And of course, Representative Mark and Representative Whips have just been great champions for our region. And you know, as I was listening to this conversation here, and especially and earlier when the folks got up and talked about why voting was so important, I'm reminded of the Martin Luther King quote about the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And we bend it, right? It's our job. So, thank you.
All of our productions at GCTV are sponsored in part by Bay State Health, providing the care you and your family need when you need it close to home. Visit them online at baystatehealth.org. Greenfield Savings Bank. Visit them at 400 Main Street in Greenfield. Call them at 774-3191 or go online to greenfieldsavings.com. Greenfield Community College, providing access and excellence in higher education in the Pioneer Valley. Visit them at gcc.mass.edu. The Hammond Family. The Hammond family are longtime supporters of Greenfield Community Television. New Fortune Chinese Restaurant on the Mohawk Trail in Greenfield. Visit them online at newfortunema.com. Call them at 772-0838 and check them out on Facebook. Real Cleaning Services, cleaning Hampshire and Franklin County since 1972. We don't cut corners, we clean them. Check them out online at realclean.com. Call them at 413-422-1143. People's United Bank, located at 45 Federal Street in Greenfield. You can call them at 774-3713 or visit them online at peoples.com. The Solar Store of Greenfield, replacing fossil fuels and nuclear power one home at a time. Visit them at 23 Fisk Ave. Call them at 413-772-3122 or visit them online at solarstoreofgreenfield.com. Thank you to our sponsors for supporting all of GCTV's productions.